I no longer see the pastoral task as like teaching people the right set of things to believe or the right set of teachings. I see my role as someone who's supposed to raise the right questions.
Welcome to the Grounded Presence Podcast, a place for exploring authentic identity, deep community, and an ever-evolving spiritual journey. I'm your host, Daniel Powell, and I am super excited for the conversation I get to share with you today. It's the next conversation in the short series that I've been recording under the title, The Work That Is Yours, where I've sat down with a number of people that are doing really interesting and meaningful work in the world and really creating their own unique path to do that work. Now, today's guest is Dale Fredrickson. He's a pastor, but he's also a spoken word poet. Now, I don't mean that he's a pastor that writes poetry on the side as a hobby. He's a pastor that writes poetry because he has to. Because diving headfirst into the depths of the human experience, that's where Dale does all of his work from. And in talking to him in this episode, he tells me that writing and performing poetry is really his way of staying tuned in to the human experience and keeping his heart soft, in so many words. And Dale just does some phenomenal work with his poetry, and he writes in this way that's not just describing things in flowery language, but more of an invitation into an experience, to surrender to these moments that he's artfully laid out in writing. Instead of just merely understanding them, it's really just authenticity on a page, and it's awesome. Now, we went a little long on this conversation, so I broke it into two parts. On this week's episode, Dale and I talk about what it looks like to be a pastor and a poet. And then on the next episode, I'll share some of the poetry off of his recent album, On Wounds and Wonder, with you. And Dale and I will have some fun conversations around each piece. Now, before I get things going here, I should let you know that I am giving away some of Dale's poetry. I have a copy of his On Wounds and Wonders album right here in my hand, along with the companion book. And I'd love to mail these to you, so I'm doing a drawing for these, and all you have to do to be entered into that drawing is hop on iTunes, write a brief review for the podcast, and then screenshot the review, send it to the show's email address, thegroundedpresence@gmail.com. So go review the show, and you might win some free poetry for it. All right. Well, that's enough out of me for now. Let's get into this week's show. Here's me and Dale chatting it up about poetry, pastors, the church, and the human experience. Enjoy. All right. So every time I sit down and do one of these, like, I'm so glad to have you here, like, present with me instead of doing a over the phone interview. You know, it's just so much nicer when you're looking at somebody's face, talking to them. And I just hate how much I'm rushing around when I'm trying to get these things recording, you know. So I'm gonna do something a little bit different this time, and I'll leave this in the actual final conversation. But so check this out. I'm gonna show you a picture of something that I saw at my window the other day. So
what do you got there, man?
Out of our window, you can see a little sidewalk. We're up in a third floor apartment. I saw this guy walking down the street. Now,
yeah, man.
What Dale's looking at there is a homeless guy who has taken a
minimalist,
the little kid shopping cart with like little race car and everything on it. So I just got such a huge kick out of that. You don't look like you think it's funny.
He's committed. He's committed.
I was like, he took the kiddie cart. Like, that's messed up.
The kitty car, man. Desperate times call for desperate measures, you know.
All right, so we'll see how that works. I'm just trying to lighten the mood there a little bit, you know. Anyway, so I got Dale with me today. You go by Dale. You go by Dale Carl, Dale Fredrickson, Pastor Dale. Do you have any other aliases that we need to know about here?
No, just Dale is fine.
So no other aliases for you?
No other aliases, man.
I was thinking you were going to have at least 3 extras for me. I'm a little bummed out. So you're a poet as well as I guess there's a lot of poets out there. You are a published poet. Is that a way to put it?
Yeah. I think I'm a spoken word poet primarily.
But a poet who publishes his work, not just like
Right.
somebody who occasionally like jots down.
Scribbles on pages.
some
I do
words
scribble on pages, though.
Well, yeah. A little more official than that. That's all I'm getting at. That's all I'm
thank
getting
you.
at. But so you are a poet, a published poet, a performing poet, as well as a pastor for a United Methodist Church out here near Denver in Lakewood. It's just quite the mix, you know.
Are you trying to say I'm weird, man? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, you are a little weird, as long as weird means different, good, and probably a little closer to what more people need to be like.
Right.
But no, I just love your poetry. You released this On Wounds and Wonder project. It's a little book, and then it's also an album of poetry songs. Is that the right way to say it? Or
yeah, thank you. Yeah,
but
that's right.
I just love that. I think it's such an
Thank you.
awesome project, and
Thank you, man.
And I mean, even that title, it's just fantastic. You know, it's like I can sit with that and think about it for like half an hour, and it could take me to some interesting places.
Yeah,
you know?
thank you. I appreciate that.
And what I really love about your poetry is that it does something to me. You know what I mean? It's not like I just love things that draw you in, and they're like so specific to you that it becomes like you know, you're so connected with yourself through the poetry that like that kind of engenders a connection with me and myself. And it's when I listen to your poetry, I related a lot to Levi the Poet.
Yeah, man.
If you've ever heard that album, what is it? A Correspondence in Fiction?
Yeah, I have.
Dude, that album, it's like, I can't really tell you what he's talking about. Right. Maybe I could tell you what like one sentence means, but I couldn't tell you what it came from in his life, you know, but it's like, it just touches me so deeply.
He makes you feel, doesn't
and
he?
It just like poof, drops me into this moment, you know. It's kind of like this experience I had at my grandmother's funeral that I talked about on the podcast a month ago, you know, just like where there was a space around the casket that was like this mystical space that, you know, like 6 feet, there's kind of like this line that you cross where it's just like, there's nothing else in the world, right? This is what I'm focusing on. So anyways, that's what that Levi
amazing,
the Poet
man.
does to me, that album, and that's what yours does to me. You know, it just kind of brings me into this like just awareness of the now. And that sounds really cheesy, but it just like, it's centering.
I don't think so. That's
just
amazing.
to observe the connection. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to give you that praise.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Thank you. That's high honor that you felt the same way around your grandma's casket, around Levi the Poet, that there's something about poetry that resounds deep within the human heart, I think is what you're saying, right?
I'm saying there's something special about your poetry.
Well, thank you.
I've heard plenty of poetry that's, you know, just kind of cute and like descriptive, and, you know, maybe it's like a different look
Yeah, right.
at something.
Well,
but
thank you.
I really like it when things have different postures toward things, right?
Yes.
It's not looking at something. It's like, okay, I'm going to experience this and like realize that language is wholly inadequate, you know,
Yeah, that's good.
and try to put it into words instead of like, I'm going to experience this and describe it the way I see it with some flowery language. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see
Can I
what
pick
you're
it up?
saying. Yeah, I
Like
hear
you're
you.
there in it, you know, you're like doing it, and I can tell.
Yeah,
It comes
thank
through
you.
in your work.
It's phenomenal. Thank you.
So you're a pastor and a poet. I've been thinking about this as we've been talking about doing this interview and or this conversation. Let's keep it informal, all right? But you know, there's this weird disconnect, I feel like, when we talk about pastors and then when we talk about pastoral.
Yeah, right.
The one that means like pastoral care.
Right.
But, you know, because it's like, at least for me, it's like when you think of pastors, you know, you really think of somebody leading, you know, a structure like an institution that has a fair amount of power, you know. But when you think of pastoral, it like brings up these images of Mother Teresa or something, you know.
That's amazing. Yeah, that difference you've made. Yeah, and that's probably cultural, you know, and the baggage that Christianity carries right now. And you know, it's said so well by Dave Kinnaman's book and Gabe Lyon's book, you know, Christianity has an image problem. And this whole idea of like, even that you associated pastoral with power, and that's but where pastoral, you associated the work of Mother Teresa, loving those poor people in Calcutta, India. Yeah, that's a big difference, isn't it?
Yeah. A little minute detail, just
Yep.
changes your filter. And hey, I guess that's
Yeah.
what what your poetry is about. A lot, is
Yeah.
like making sure those minute details convey a real experience. I mean, so, we're talking culturally, pastor kind of has like the bad rap to it with like megachurch pastor,
Yeah.
but more
Yeah.
like deeper in the human experience, like pastoral, that's not a title. That's really more of an experience of how somebody like touches you. It just seems like this pairing of pastor and poet, it just seems like a really harmonious pairing. And why do you think that's more the exception than the rule? Like, because I've never met a pastor who's really truly a poet like you are.
Yeah.
I've
yeah.
met ones who can, they're either very, I guess they're all very logical, but some of them go like kind of the logic way, and it's like straight up the scripture is logic, and then
Right,
some of
right.
them kind of take the science route, which is totally interesting, but at the end of the day, if somebody's not displaying their experience from stage as they're
Yeah.
talking to you, it's really kind of it just strikes a hollow note, like
Yeah. I hear
it
you
just
saying.
doesn't resonate. So I'm talking a lot. Well,
Oh, I
give me
love
some
it,
of your
man.
thoughts here.
I
Let's hear
mean,
it.
I think to answer your question, I think to be a pastor or to be a theologian, it's to speak of God. And so for me, and I think like there'd be different people who fall within the category of like, for other people, speaking of God means science. For other people, speaking of God means certainty, belief. For me, to speak of God, to speak of divinity and our humanity, the type of like, the way I look at it as we're like these finite human creatures, and there's this like divine, mysterious, someone that like we should have like a little more caution in how we name, how we define. So poetry for me helps me in that type of, in my search for the divine, in my search for language about this experience of the holy. That's far more helpful than even science is for me. And so I'm more comfortable with like speaking in metaphor and speaking in words that are carefully chosen with an intentionality to invite an experience of mystery. Instead, those type of, for me, certainty and calculations and that type of language falls short of this. We're really trying to talk about this type of other realm of existence, right? We know the social, economical, and political is there. And if you're like me, you were like taught that in school. But there is this spirit, there is the spiritual realm that we feel, we experience. If you've ever had a child, if you've ever been to a funeral and you feel the community surround you in that grief process, there's something more. And poetic language has the ability to capture what is beyond our human language at capturing. So I don't know why it's the exception, because for me to speak honestly, to let in the everyday experience of what it means to be human, poetry fits really well with our search. Now there's going to be a whole lot of people that are like, hate that, because what they're expecting in their experience is for their pastor to say something certain, secure, factual in their way of understanding it.
Well,
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, everything you're saying makes so much sense, and I feel like without even going into more of your poetry, we could probably fill 2 hours with like everything you just said, But, the human like core just really wants something tangible and like understandable. Deep down, we really just want to know the truth and like master it and be done with it, right? Like, I know the truth, like this is all there is. But the harder path, is that path that you display so well through your work, that path of unknowing. And that's why I think it's so important for
That's so great,
pastors to be poets.
I think for me, the way I've grown, the path and the experiences and the people who've shaped my ideas, I no longer see the pastoral task as like teaching people the right set of things to believe or the right set of teachings. I see my role as someone who's supposed to raise the right questions. And the authority that's given to me is not the authority to of mind control over a community, but to nurture and care and to be pastoral in people's minds and thinking, to say, no, this question of race, this question of gender, this question of compassion, this question of our table fellowship, these things need to be talked about. This question of whatever the community is going through, urbanization or whatever we're going through. But my job is to create these spaces with words of discomfort. Because it's interesting, if you think back on your life of kind of the best coaches you had, or the best, if you were in music, the best band teachers you had, or even in math, right? The best math teachers you had were always challenging you, allowing that discomfort, whether it was that equation you couldn't solve, or whether it was the team, the championship, the good team you were going to play, or the next jump shot you were working on. Good coaches, good teachers create spaces of discomfort. And I think poetry does a wonderful job of creating the space of discomfort with the everyday human experience in order for people to wrestle with it themselves and to think it anew themselves.
So my question for you here is, from your perspective of wanting to ask good questions and wanting to invite more of that unknowing, does that serve somebody who needs that traditional belief and really just something to hang their hat on for the moment,
Yeah, it's such a great question. Or probably not.
I mean,
I'm trying to be funny with you, but well, in one way I think it does, because I have to be my most authentic self for me through a poem, through a traditional sermon, through just talking with you in a conversation. And I think that a good pastor, a good theologian, a good poet, they look at the raw and the real of everyday human experience. And so I would say that anything else is a deception of ourselves. It's a placebo. It's a drug that we're taking. And it's sort of like going with emotional health, you've got to feel the depth of grief and pain and anger if you ever hope to heal and be a healthy individual. If you kind of give people a sugar-coated view of reality, you're not ever letting them encounter the reality of human life. And so I think part of it is about some theory about human growth and human flourishing. Until you've really allowed yourself to feel the weight and pain of American history. Not just its highs, but its brutal lows on our Native American brothers and sisters, on our African American brothers and sisters, and the list goes on and on about how policies privilege the powerful and do great harm to the weak and the least and those who don't have a voice. You haven't really encountered what it means to be American, what it means to be human. And that every single moment is filled with such purpose, with such meaning. Your voice can make a difference to write a new policy, to amend a wrong that has been done, to draw the circle wider for those who have been left out. So I think a pastor, the weight of being a poet, the weight of speaking into a microphone for someone else is huge. And for me, there has to be a kind of an honesty factor, a sense of congruency between what is going on in the historical social realities and in this beautiful faith we're trying to think through. And to think of God as love means to wrestle with the raw realities that humans have not always loved well, and to start to diagnose those and to think about those and to form the human heart and affections in a different way. So that's how I think honesty.
Yeah, no.
So that's what I got on that.
I think you're so right, because the most valuable experiences that I've ever had in churches, are experiences where the pastor gets up and he says, you know what, guys, I don't know if I believe in God anymore. It's like, tell me about your story.
Right.
Tell me how you got there,
Right.
And then it's like so just valuable and like open.
Yeah.
It's the experience. It's not like the belief. It's fleshing out like the doubts that they have and that are definitely going to be present in the community. That's happened to me twice. It was once with a pastor that said, I don't believe in God. I don't know if I believe in God anymore.
Yeah.
And once with a pastor that stood up and just really struggled with the concept of hell.
Yeah.
A very, very intellectual person.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know.
And see, that goes to what I was saying about like creating space for discomfort and being okay with that, being okay with doubts and fears and allowing us to voice what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the best poem, when we let in the despair, and we let despair, we let doubt, we let sadness have a voice. And I think one of your original questions was the tension between being a pastor and being a poet.
Yeah.
And I think it's about expectations. It's that there are times in the pastoral role where everything needs, that you are sort of expected that everything, like all the bows tie up real nice, the presents are really wrapped beautifully. But the reality of God and the messiness that is like a human struggle to understand the divine, and the reality of humans living on the streets and living in neighborhoods and apartment buildings is messy and hard, and there's angst and there's fears. And so those two sometimes, and the expectations for me of a poet is to speak most honestly about everyday experience. And that's the same for me as a pastor, but it's people's expectations that thwart that, It's sometimes that in benediction at the church is like, so maybe we ought to go home and just cry for the world. Or maybe you ought to go home and sign up for the protest and march on the Capitol. Or maybe you ought to go home and write a song and write a poem and make a painting, So I think there's no tension, because I have committed myself for like good or for worse, and I have to be true to myself in this pursuit. But definitely there's that tension there of what they expect, what they want of their pastor, Happy songs all the time are not good for your soul. There's a season where you need to sing like the most bright, happy colored chords of like, hallelujah, life is good. But a lot of life is not that mountaintop. Most of life is that deep, dark valley where we all are like struggling to understand who we are, who our neighbor is, what does it mean to be in this world, and act meaningfully, responsibly, to act for others. And so I would say that like, that's where the pastoral poet row is so important, because it allows people to allow that fog, and allow the fog to be the place of growth and the place where our community is strengthened. Because if you've ever been on the mountaintop or like on a championship team, it's actually much harder. It's much harder to bond. You bond when you're like, you are taking that upward trail and you're not sure where you're headed. That's where the strength in the soul gains its like roots in the soil, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, those are the most bonding experiences when you're working on a project with somebody.
Yes.
Yeah, and like it's just kind of like everyday life.
Yeah, that's right.
And
that's right.
Yeah, no, you just like hit the nail on the head. Because what we're so often trying to do as humans is just, we're trying to go to either one or the other of these polarities. We're either trying to pretend like it doesn't exist, or we're trying to fix it. Does this sound like our political system?
Oh, absolutely.
Instead of just like kind of living in the middle and like feeling the angst like of, homelessness, or just we really can't fix it 100%,
Yeah, right.
We can pretend, but there's always going to be like human need and like human just depravity,
Yeah, I mean, the way I tried to say it On Wounds and Wonder is, the way I started writing the book was I literally was like studying people's lives, and I had this little note card on my desk, and it was like, how do we heal from the wounds so we can experience the wonder? And I literally was like, all I want to do is like help people to like, take these wounds that we all have and get rid of them so all life can be this like experience of wonder. And I came to find out that was like a garbage question. And ironically, that like we never live without the wounds and the wonder. We always live in the midst of both, like in this great sea of life. It's like, yeah, that was wounding and that was hurtful. And yeah, that was beautiful and that was amazing. And maturity comes when we learn that both are always going to be present, that it's not the either or, it's always the both and. And so what I came to kind of reformulate is like, yeah, actually how we respond to these wounds shape us. And so we all experience neglect and abandonment and disappointment and despair and even betrayal. And for me, I kind of categorize these as the lovelessness of what it means to be human. And what we do with these makes all the difference. We can deny these experiences in that great sea as we're floating on it. We can rationalize these away. Oh, this happened because of this and this. We can parade them. Those people are like, I'm broken and I am raising my flag of brokenness to the whole world, which is like kind of cool for a little while, but then not so cool of 5 years of it. And so we do all these things with wounds to like avoid them instead of to embrace them, to sit with them, to let them lead us to the way of growth. And so the wonder is residing in the sea right next to the wounds, that I can be fully whole in the midst of my deep brokenness, that I can experience love in the midst of betrayal and anger. And so on wounds and wonder became for me not these polarities like I set out to solve, but this great, beautiful sea that I'm constantly swimming in. And so that's kind of where the poems took their shape.
I like your image of like these two separate water reservoirs, oceans,
Yeah.
It's like it's like you're standing on top of them, like with all your baggage, and like they're both ice, and like it takes a long time to melt through both of those, but when you start melting down like into that woundedness, like that's when you actually start experiencing the wonder, It's slow, and it's not like it's not like you just practice mindfulness and then it happens.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
like slow melt.
Yeah. It's
and eventually you get deeper in the wounds and deeper in the wonder, and
yeah.
you like
That's right.
feeling both, and it's crappy, but it's amazing.
That's I think that's what everyday experience shows us, right? I was taking a hike with my family the other day, and I never noticed before, but if you go anywhere in the mountains, you literally see like the death of the last year. A tree fell down, a squirrel's now using it as a home, and then the new growth of like a new baby pine tree right next to it. Old and new, dead and alive, right next to each other, learning to flourish as one. It's like a beautiful thing, and that's us, Here's this dead part of you, here's this alive part in you, here's this wound, and here's this wonder, and here's the reality of life. It's beautiful and terrible and amazing and wonderful all in one. And anytime you try to like deny that, you're robbing yourself of like a true, like abundant type of flourishing love and life. So the whole point, the journey, and this was all like learning from, part of the writing for me was like learning, like wrestling with this, like, my original question, like, how do I get away from the wounds so I can experience the wonder, right? So naive, right? You never do, Dale. Like what you do is you get to be on that sea and all its deep, dark mysteries and pain and all of those bright, shining new mornings where the dolphin swims next to you, the rainbow comes from in the midst of the darkest season of your life. And so I think the language of poetry helps us to capture that you are here in it, death and life right next to you, chaos and creation singing for you. This is what it means to be human. My family and I, we've got this one spot in San Clemente, Calafia State Beach, and this is like our summer vacation spot. And we've got all these like great traditions of like, we're doing sand crabs. We've got like In-N-Out burgers on the beach, that we'll get before. And then we're like running up and down the beach. And my daughter and I went for a walk, and we literally saw a little baby dolphin on the beach that had been bitten by a shark. And it was a little shocking. It's very rare, but it was dead on the beachside. And she was little enough to be like, "Oh, Dad." And I was like, "Oh, why did I take my daughter to see a dead dolphin?" And in that moment, we just kind of kept walking, and I just like realized like this beach, this ocean, so filled with wonder, so filled with beauty, is also the site of some really horrific, hard things. And I thought about her, and I thought about like holding her little hand, and I'm like, I can't hold her back from all that is dark, but I can be with her, sit with her in it, show her that there's more to this than just that experience, that life is more than just the darkness and the misery. There is beauty and hope. And so at all the same time, this beach is this place of joy and celebration and rest, and this beach is this place of misery and horror, really, right? So that's the reality of the human life, the spiritual life, the realm of life beyond just social, economic, and political reductionism, that this space is just for our political power. No, this space is also a space for our growth in our souls expanding, our hearts becoming the antennas they were always meant to be. So expanding into a capacity to love and an imagination for the world and what humans can be.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I think you just blew up some comments there. Like,
thank you, man. You're so kind, dude.
You
so
give me a
kind.
lot more to think about. I'll say that,
You're so kind.
Yeah. Wow.
Thank you for engaging me today and taking the time for this interview. I love it.
Just tons of thoughts running through my head. Just about, okay, the church, but I think you're really right. There is a much better way to do things, and there's a much better way to, not just kind of like shield the eyes like your congregation or whatever from the dolphin bitten by the shark, but kind of invite the experience and see like what that has to teach you, know?
And I think and don't, if there's like someone listening, like, don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying like you use appropriate developmental means for like teaching your kids, but I think we do a huge disservice in church by.
I love what you just said. My wife, yes. Okay, this stitches it all together. My wife was at the park with our daughter the other day, right? And she was telling me this experience, how she had seen, it's a park up the street. There's like signs that there's coyotes in the park and whatnot. So she sees some baby ducks that had, been, like their necks had been bitten by a coyote or something, a dog, and they were just dead, And so she's 2.5, so she sees them. And then, so cute, she's like, ducks need Band-Aids.
Oh, it's so cute.
And the ducks need some Band-Aids. They're not okay. That's developmentally appropriate.
That's right.
For her to understand it that way, and for mom to be okay with her understanding it that way.
And your mom can sigh with her and sit with her in those Band-Aids.
Oh, dude.
And that's perfectly appropriate. But what we've got in the church is this.
There's more to this experience.
There's more to the story. Let's hear the Band-Aid. Yeah, let's hear it.
So later on, they're walking around the lake, and then they see a mama duck with her ducklings, and then I guess my daughter says to my wife, she's like, "Mama gave baby birds Band-Aids."
She thought they were healed up. That's beautiful.
But no, I'm just stammering here because I'm just
beautiful.
Dude, that's such a good parallel for the church and just like development. And I'm just like, okay, let's have somebody up front. I don't want to say you can talk in 2 languages.
Whoa.
I've seen you preach, and you speak in a way that I think could be taken, if somebody wants to read it, very straight and very like biblical, right? But then you talk in this other way where it's like there's a lot of space. And it's kind of like the marriage of terms. It's not like these are the correct words and these aren't. It just kind of marries them all together and it doesn't define, it doesn't explain, but it talks about it. It talks about the beauty and just the experience.
What's not cute, though, is the 50-year-old man, the 60-year-old woman who've never encountered real, raw Christianity, the experience of the horrors of what Christian experience has meant throughout church history, and the beauty too. So I think that it goes both ways of like challenging, whether it's religious leaders or just honest dialogue in our culture about the everyday real experience, the raw and real of humanity and being human in history, And so I think it's not okay to like hold back. Like every high schooler ought to understand where the Bible came from, how it came from many different cultures, many different genres, what the limitations of those genres are, the differences there are in the Gospels, the theories behind how they came to be, that they weren't written by the first disciples, but they were written by the great-grandkids who were taking Grandma and Grandpa's stories and creating artistic narratives on what they could mean. Those should be some basic things. Instead, we like to shield people. The image I come to is the M. Night Shyamalan's movie, The Village. And the village elders should be opening the gates and saying, go, experience the world, drink deep from every different experience you can find, and come back and teach us what it means that our faith or our traditions be exploded or widened even more. And oftentimes we have the opposite still in North American culture of like the fear of the unknown, the fear of the question, and really like we should teach our kids how sacred questions are, and how that exploration, that pressing of everything is what makes everything more beautiful and better and brings you back to the mystery of God, of life, of human community with one another.
I love that image of the village elder. Like I'm a huge fan of this elder archetype,
Yeah.
And my theory lately, just on like church and like where are like these real elders that are encouraging you to go and experience, they're not telling you how to do it, how to see it. They're saying, oh, you think you need to do that? Do it.
Yeah.
Tell me what it does to you.
Yeah. Yep. That's awesome. Yeah.
But no, my whole theory has been like, okay, we just need like these implanted elders in the church, right? So that everybody who thinks that the baby ducks just need Band-Aids, they just need Band-Aids and they'll be better, like they can do their thing and they can develop in their own way. But when you get to that point of developing, and then you start getting a little frustrated and you stand up, you're like, these baby birds don't need Band-Aids. They're dead. We need to focus on the ones that are alive. When you get to that stage, one of these elders can just kind of sidle up next to you and be like, hey, dude, like, I understand exactly where you're at. These people just aren't ready to hear it yet.
Yeah.
Let's go sit down and just talk.
Yeah.
And
right.
You know what I mean? So it's like then that person's developing, but they can respect the development of others.
Right. Exactly.
But
yeah,
I love this
good.
Conversation. I love this conversation.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Dale Fredrickson. He's seriously one of my favorite people. We'll get into some of his poetry on the next episode of the podcast, and you won't want to miss that. But until then, hop on iTunes, write a review for the show, send a screenshot of it to thegroundedpresence@gmail.com, and you might just win some free poetry for it. And I think your odds are pretty good, so you should definitely do it. Plus, those reviews will really help the show grow. So I'll see you right back here shortly to share some of Dale's poetry with you. But until then, make sure to connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook @TheGroundedPresence, and I will see you right back here in 2 weeks.